What if I told you that survival in the Wild West depended not on the speed of your revolver, but on a single smoldering ember? In the vast prairies and icy mountains of the 19th century, fire was not just warmth, it was currency, a symbol of trust, and the only barrier separating settlers from the silent darkness. These people lived in a world without electricity, where night was absolute and the cold penetrated to the very heart. Watch the video to the end to learn what unwritten laws determined who would receive life-saving warmth and how pioneers managed to transport fire hundreds of kilometers, keeping it alive for weeks. I will reveal the pioneers' best-kept secret. Fire was more important than food. In conditions where a person was left alone with endless, untouched nature, the flame was not just a physical necessity, but a psychological anchor. It was the only living, moving, and warm element in the cold and static landscape of the night. For a lone trapper or scout, the campfire was the only companion that broke the oppressive silence. Without it, the mind could give up long before the body. Imagine the darkness of the 19th century on the Great Plains. It was not the kind of night we are used to, with the scattered lights of cities. It was absolute, all-consuming darkness, thick and almost tangible, erasing the horizon and any landmarks. In such darkness, a person felt completely vulnerable and lost. A small point of fire became the center of the entire universe, the only proof that you still existed and controlled at least this tiny piece of space. The flame was a psychological shield. It created a visible barrier between a person and the unknown lurking in the night. As long as the fire burned, it created a safe, illuminated circle within which one could work, rest, and plan. This light provided an illusion of control and security that was vital to maintaining sanity. An extinguished fire, on the other hand, meant an immediate return to chaos and vulnerability, and this fear was a constant companion to every settler. In addition, fire was a symbol of home and civilization. Far from settlements, farms, and cities, pioneers carried this small piece of orderly world with them. Building a fire was a ritual that transformed a wild, unfamiliar place into a temporary home. The smell of smoke, the sight of smoldering coals, the warmth emanating from the flames, all these were powerful triggers that connected people to their past and gave them hope for the future. For a group of people, for example, in a train car, a shared campfire was a social glue. It was a place where people gathered after a hard day, shared news, told stories, and made plans. Around the fire, arguments subsided, and a sense of community was born. It was here, around the shared flame, that strangers became a cohesive team capable of survival. Fire brought people together physically and emotionally. For a loner who met another traveler, offering to share a fire was the highest expression of trust and goodwill. It was tantamount to an offer of peace and cooperation. Refusal of such an offer was considered almost an insult and a sign of hostility. Thus, the flame regulated social interactions on the frontier, where there were no written laws, but strict rules of hospitality existed. Maintaining a fire required constant attention and effort. Gathering fuel, protecting it from wind and rain. This constant routine task structured the pioneers' day and night. It prevented apathy or despair from setting in, forcing constant action. This responsibility for preserving the small spark of life disciplined and helped to maintain human dignity in the harshest conditions. Even the sound of the fire had a therapeutic effect. The steady crackling of the logs was the only music in the silence of the night. This sound was soothing, giving a sense of stability and predictability in a world full of dangers and surprises. It was the backdrop against which the entire life of a pioneer unfolded, from sunset to sunrise. Ultimately, fire was a measure of competence. A person who was unable to build and maintain a fire was considered unfit for life on the frontier. This basic, fundamental skill was the first test that weeded out the weak and unprepared. The ability to control fire was equivalent to the ability to survive, and this knowledge was valued above all else. Fire was the center of their small universe, the only point of light in an ocean of darkness. It provided not only physical warmth, but also the strength of spirit to face a new day full of trials. What do you think could unite complete strangers in the modern world in the same way as a shared campfire? Share your opinion in the comments and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss other stories about the harsh life of the American frontier. Want to know the secret that every pioneer carried in his pocket, and that was worth more than gold? It wasn't a revolver or a bag of gold dust, but a simple fire-starting kit. It consisted of only 3 components: a striker, flint, and tinder, stored in a special tinder box. Losing this kit was tantamount to disaster, so it was guarded like the apple of one's eye, stored in waterproof bags made of oiled leather. This kit was the key to warmth, hot food, and life itself. The main element of the kit was the flint. Most often it was a strip of high-carbon steel, hardened in a special way. The shape of the flint could vary from a simple oval plate to an intricately forged object with curls. An experienced pioneer could use the back of his knife, but a specialized flint striker was much more convenient and reliable. It was held in one hand, ready to strike the flint with a sliding blow. The second component was flint. This was not just any stone, but a piece of hard mineral, usually quartz, with sharp edges. When steel struck the edge of the flint with force, it chipped off tiny shavings, which instantly ignited from friction and contact with the air. These red-hot particles were the spark itself. Pioneers carefully selected suitable stones, valuing those that produced an abundant and hot shower of sparks. The most important and capricious part of the set was the tinder. A spark alone is too cold and short-lived to ignite wood. It needed a mediator, a material capable of catching the spark and starting to smolder. Charred fabric, or slow-burning cloth, served as the ideal tinder. It was prepared in advance by burning pieces of linen or cotton in a closed metal box without air access. The result was a material ready to ignite from the slightest spark. Natural materials were also used as tinder. Dried tinder fungi collected from trees were an excellent option. They were crushed and sometimes treated with special compounds for better ignition. Dry moss, fluffed fibers from certain plants, or the finest wood dust from tree hollows were also suitable. Collecting and preparing tinder was a constant concern, which was done whenever possible. All these components were stored in a tinder box. This could be a simple tin box from under tobacco or a specially carved wooden container. The main task of the tinder box was to protect the tinder from moisture. Even a small drop of water could render the entire set useless. Experienced people often wore the tinder box around their necks under their clothes, warming it with their body heat. The process of starting a fire required skill and patience. The pioneer prepared a nest from the driest and thinnest kindling material. Dry grass, thin twigs, or shavings. Then he took a flint in his left hand and placed a piece of charred cloth on it. With his right hand, he struck the flint with sharp sliding blows. Sparks flew onto the fabric, and sooner or later, one of them would cause it to smolder. As soon as a small smoldering point appeared on the tinder, it had to be fanned. The pioneer carefully transferred the smoldering tinder to the prepared nest of kindling. Then he began to blow gently, supplying oxygen. This was the most crucial moment. Too strong a stream of air could extinguish the ember. Too weak a stream would not allow it to ignite. Gradually, the ember turned into a flame, and the fire was lit. This method was the main one for hundreds of years and did not disappoint those who mastered it perfectly. It was more reliable than early matches, which were expensive, rare, and instantly dampened. Phosphorus-based matches, which appeared in the 19th century, were also dangerous and could spontaneously combust in your pocket. Therefore, the centuries-old flint remained the choice of professionals. Mastering this skill was fundamental. It was taught from an early age, and a pioneer who was unable to start a fire in a couple of minutes under any conditions was considered a novice. This simple set was the key to survival, a symbol of independence and readiness for all the challenges that the frontier could throw at him. It separated a civilized person from helplessness in the face of the elements. What modern thing that seems ordinary to us would you call indispensable for survival in extreme conditions? But what if your tinder is wet, your flint is lost, and there is only wet forest around you? In the next chapter, we will reveal the shocking truth about how pioneers made fire from seemingly non-combustible materials and what they used as fuel where there was not a single tree. What you are about to learn seems impossible. How pioneers survived in places where there was not a single tree for hundreds of miles around. The Great Plains were a vast, treeless ocean of grass. For settlers accustomed to the forests of the East, this was a real shock. The fuel problem here was more acute than any other. But the resourcefulness of a person pushed to the brink of survival knew no bounds. The first and most obvious solution on the plains was dry grass. However, pressed grass, collected in bales, was too valuable as feed. Therefore, the settlers collected ordinary grass, dried in the sun, which grew everywhere. The problem was that it burned instantly, giving off very little heat. To solve this problem, women and older family members spent hours twisting the grass into tight bundles, resembling logs. These grass logs burned more slowly and produced a more steady flame. They were stored for future use, with whole stacks of them piled up near temporary dwellings. It was hard, monotonous work. Pioneer families traveled along the route all day, and in the evening, instead of resting, they had to gather fuel for cooking dinner and heating for the night. Children were responsible for gathering this grass along the entire route of the wagon. Another important source of fuel was wormwood, or sagebrush. In some parts of the plains, these shrubs grew in abundance. Their dry, hard branches and roots were excellent fuel. They burned very hot and fast, with a characteristic pungent smell. The pioneers uprooted these bushes, as it was the resin-soaked roots that produced the longest and hottest flames. In wooded areas, such as the Rocky Mountains, the problem was different. There were many trees, but they were often damp, especially after rain or during the spring thaw. It was almost impossible to light a fire with wet logs. Here, the pioneers used a different tactic. They looked for dead trees that were still standing. Such wood, dried by the wind and sun, was dry inside, even if it was wet on the outside. If only wet, fallen trunks were available, an axe was used. The pioneer split the log into several pieces. The inside of the trunk, its core, almost always remained dry. Then from these split pieces, he began to chip off paper-thin splinters. This process required patience and a sharp knife, but the result was worth it. These thin splinters and shavings, known as feathers, were the key to igniting a fire from damp wood. The pioneer gathered a whole bunch of these feathers. They had a large surface area and ignited instantly, even from smoldering tinder. This small but hot flame from the shavings could dry and then ignite larger chips, and so gradually the fire would blaze up. Another secret fuel in coniferous forests was pine resin. Pioneers found places where resin flowed from the trunk or broke off dry branches saturated with it. This resin, or pine knots, was a natural fire starter. It burns very hot, with black smoke, and can ignite even damp branches. A piece of such resin could save the day on the wettest day. Resourcefulness was also evident in the construction of the hearth itself. In the treeless prairies where the wind blew constantly, it was difficult to build a fire. The pioneers dug a small hole in the ground. This simple depression protected the flame from the wind and concentrated the heat, allowing food to be cooked with minimal use of precious fuel. Such a Dakota fire pit was the height of efficiency. These methods, born out of necessity, showed that for a pioneer, there was no such thing as trash or bad weather. There were only materials and conditions that needed to be approached in the right way. Their ability to see fuel in dry grass or a damp log was as important a survival skill as the ability to shoot or navigate. It was a daily battle for warmth, which they won thanks to their observation skills and perseverance. If you found this story of human ingenuity and the ability to find a way out of hopeless situations as incredible as we did, don't forget to like this video. It's the best support for our channel and an incentive to look for new, little-known facts from the history of frontier exploration. Guess how much time a pioneer spent maintaining a fire at night? The answer will surprise you. Almost none, if he did everything right. At night, especially on a frosty night, getting up every hour to throw wood on the fire was not only inconvenient, but dangerous. It deprived them of precious sleep and energy. Therefore, the art of creating a long fire that could burn or smolder until morning was valued like gold. It was a whole science with its own rules and techniques. The first rule concerned the choice of wood. Not all firewood is the same. Soft woods such as pine or poplar burned quickly, brightly, and hotly, but quickly turned to ash. Hardwoods such as oak, hickory, ash, or maple were needed for a long night. These trees had dense wood that burned slowly, evenly, and most importantly, left behind large, long smoldering coals. The second secret was in building the fire correctly. For long burning, special structures were used instead of a hut or well. One of the most effective was the hunters, or taiga nodia. Two large dry logs were laid parallel to each other, and a fire was lit between them in a narrow gap. The logs, heating each other, burned very slowly and evenly, giving off heat in one direction, toward the sleeper. A simpler option, accessible even to one person, was to use a large log as a reflector. The pioneer would light a fire next to a large fallen tree trunk or rock. This surface would reflect the heat onto the sleeper. Then he would put the thickest and densest log he could find into the fire. Such a hardy log could smolder for several hours in a row, maintaining the heat in the fire. To protect it from the wind, especially on the prairies, the fire was often built in a small depression. This not only protected the flames, but also allowed them to consume fuel more slowly. Sometimes a wall of stones or sod was built around the hearth, which also served as a heat reflector and protection from gusts of wind that could scatter the coals. But the most important technique was preserving the fire, or banking the coals. Before going to bed, the pioneer did not let the fire go out completely. When there was a large pile of hot coals left, he carefully covered them with a thick layer of ash. The ash blocked the oxygen supply, preventing the coals from burning out, but also preventing them from cooling down completely. The coals went into a slow smoldering mode. This process was a real art. If the layer of ash was too thick, the coals would go out. If it was too thin, they would burn out in a couple of hours. It was necessary to find the perfect balance. Sometimes a piece of turf was placed on top of the ash with the grass facing down. This created an almost airtight can in which the coals could sleep for up to 8 hours. In the morning, the ritual was repeated in reverse order. The pioneer carefully raked the ashes. In the center of the pile, he found live, bright red coals. It was enough to put a little dry tinder on them and blow lightly, and the flame flared up again. This saved a huge amount of time and effort, eliminating the need to strike a spark again, especially in wet or frosty weather. This method was so important that in many settler families, the hearth in the house never went out. The fire in the fireplace was banked for the night, and it could burn without going out for months or even years. It was a symbol of stability and comfort. For a traveler on the prairies, such a sleeping fire was a guarantee of a warm morning and a hot breakfast before a long day of travel. Mastering these techniques was one of the key survival skills. It allowed the pioneers to conserve energy, get a good night's rest, and be ready for any challenges. It was not just about building a fire, but about controlling it, subjugating the elements to their will and calculation. Have you ever had to keep a fire going for a long time using similar methods? But what if you don't even have coals and you meet another traveler? What rules applied on the frontier? In the next chapter, we will learn about the unwritten laws of hospitality and why sharing fire was a sacred duty. In the harsh and often uninhabited expanses of the Wild West, there was no formal police force or courts as we understand them. Order was maintained by unwritten codes and customs that were stronger than any law. One of the most unbreakable rules was the rule of the common fire. On the frontier, refusing to share a fire was considered a serious crime. It was a violation of the fundamental law of human survival. When a lone traveler, whether a trapper, cowboy, or gold prospector, saw the smoke of another's campfire in the distance, he approached it with caution. There was a certain etiquette. It was customary to stop at the edge of the light, within sight, and call out to the camp owners. This was a sign of respect, showing that you had no bad intentions and were not trying to sneak up unnoticed. Violating this rule could be perceived as aggression. After the traveler announced his presence, the camp owner would usually invite him to come closer. "Come to the fire." This phrase was not just an invitation, but a symbol of hospitality and a temporary truce. Everyone was equal by the fire. It was believed that as long as a person was within the circle of light of someone else's fire, they were under the protection of the host. Any conflict was postponed until morning and had to be resolved away from the camp. The request to share the fire was commonplace. Most often it meant not just warming up, but taking a smoldering ember to light your own fire nearby, or light your pipe. Refusal of such a request was unthinkable. A person who refused to give warmth to a traveler covered himself with shame. News of such an act spread across the frontier with astonishing speed, and the person risked becoming an outcast. Sharing fire meant sharing life. In conditions where matches could get wet and flints could be lost, a live ember from someone else's fire could be a lifesaver. The pioneers understood this better than anyone else. Today you share your fire, and tomorrow you may have to ask for the same favor yourself. It was a cycle of mutual aid based on the simple understanding that no one could survive here alone. Hospitality by the fire often included offering food. The unspoken rule was that if you had a pot of food cooking, you were obliged to offer it to anyone at your campfire. The traveler, in turn, could offer something in return from their supplies, such as tobacco or coffee. This exchange was not so much a trade as a social ritual that strengthened bonds. The campfire was also the main information center of the frontier. Around the fire, travelers exchanged news, where the best grass for livestock was, where hostile groups had been spotted, what the price of gold was in the nearest town, where water could be found. This information was vital. A person who shared their fire received invaluable information in return, which could determine their further route and even save their life. This ethic extended not only to individual travelers, but also to entire groups. If a wagon train encountered a lone trapper, he was almost always invited to share their evening camp. For the train, it was an opportunity to get fresh news about the area. And for the trapper, it was a chance to enjoy food he couldn't prepare on his own and to socialize with people. Fire was the catalyst for these encounters. There were, of course, exceptions. Not all people on the frontier were honest and decent. There were bandits and robbers who could use the appearance of hospitality to deceive. But such cases only reinforced the value of the general rule. Trust was a risk, but without it, survival was impossible. And fire was the symbol around which this fragile trust was built. Thus, the ethics of the common flame was not just a beautiful tradition, but a vital social mechanism. It transformed a hostile desert into a place where one could count on help. Fire was a shared sacred object, and those who served it received in return the protection and support of the unwritten law of the frontier. This law was simple: warm another, and you will not freeze yourself. What if I told you that pioneers could transport fire hundreds of kilometers without rekindling it? In conditions of constant movement, especially for railroads, the daily procedure of rekindling the fire from scratch was a tedious waste of time and resources. It was much easier to capture the fire from the morning stop and bring it to the evening one. This practice was widespread and gave rise to several ingenious devices. The simplest and most common method was the fire bucket, or special pot. Usually it was a sturdy cast iron or copper pot with a tight lid and a sturdy handle. In the morning before setting off, the caretaker of the car would fill this pot with ashes from the night's fire. Then in the very center, deep into the ashes, she would place several of the largest and hottest smoldering coals. The secret was in the insulation. Ash is an excellent heat insulator. It prevented the coals from burning too hot, as it limited the access of oxygen, but at the same time did not allow them to cool down quickly. The pot was tightly covered with a lid to prevent sparks from flying out. In this state, the coals could smolder slowly throughout the day, while the wagon rattled along bumpy trails. Transporting fire was a responsible task. This pot was usually hung under the wagon or on a special hook on the side, away from fabric and wooden structures. Losing control of the fire on the way meant certain disaster. A wagon loaded with dry equipment and gunpowder could burst into flames in a matter of minutes. Therefore, the living fire was watched as carefully as children. Upon arrival at the new campsite, the ritual was repeated in reverse order. The pot with the fire was the center of attention. The hostess opened the lid, carefully raked the ashes, and took out the smoldering coals. They were transferred to a pre-prepared hearth with dry kindling. A few breaths with bellows or simply with the lungs, and the fire was ready. This saved precious minutes and energy after an exhausting day of travel. Lone travelers, such as mountain trappers, used more compact methods. They could not afford to carry a heavy pot. Instead, they used special boxes or tinder boxes. Dry tinder was tightly packed into such a metal or wooden box. A smoldering coal was placed inside and the box was closed. The tinder slowly smoldered inside and could be fanned into a flame at any moment. Some Native American tribes and experienced trackers used hollow horns or special containers lined with clay for this purpose. The principle was the same, to limit oxygen access and cause the material to smolder slowly rather than burn. Such a fire container could be safely carried in the hands or in a saddlebag, and it retained heat for many hours. This practice of preserving fire was vital. It saved not only time, but also resources. There was no need to waste precious tinder every time or look for dry kindling in wet weather. Having a portable fire was a huge advantage. In a train carriage, a fire watch was often appointed to ensure that the mother fire did not go out during the journey. The practice of transporting fire also had a social dimension. If someone in the group accidentally extinguished the fire in their pot, they could borrow a coal from their neighbors. This further strengthened the spirit of collectivism and interdependence. Everyone was in the same boat, and the common fire was a visible symbol of their unity. Losing it meant letting down the whole group. Sometimes unexpected situations arose. The pot could tip over, or a heavy downpour could flood it. In such cases, it was necessary to return to the basics, flint and tinder. But this was perceived as a minor tragedy and extra work. The presence of a live fire was the norm and a sign of a well-organized life. This simple but ingenious method, transporting smoldering coals and ashes, demonstrates the highest level of adaptation of the pioneers to their conditions. They did not just survive, they created effective systems that made their lives easier. Have you heard of similar ways of preserving and transporting fire in other cultures or eras? This practice was especially important for large groups. But how did it change the social structure of the camp? In the next chapter, we will dive into the evening life of a wagon train camp and see how a single campfire became the center of an entire universe. When a long wagon train, having traveled another 15 to 20 miles during the day, stopped for the night, it turned into a small village bustling with life. First, the wagons were placed in a circle, the famous corral. This was done not only for protection. Inside this circle, in a safe space, evening life began, and bonfires immediately became the center of that life. It was not one large bonfire, as one might imagine. The wagon train consisted of many families or small groups. Each such group, usually consisting of several families who had joined together for a common life, lit its own mess fire. The camp was filled with dozens of small fires, each of which became the center of its own small social group. The fire was first and foremost a kitchen. Heavy cast iron cookware was taken out of the wagons. Deep Dutch ovens, frying pans with long handles, bean pots, and of course, coffee pots. Cooking was the main evening ritual. The smell of fried bacon, bread baking in the ashes, and, most importantly, strong, bitter coffee mixed with smoke, creating the unique atmosphere of the camp. The Dutch oven was the queen of this kitchen. It was a deep cast iron pot with a flat lid that had a rim. It was placed directly on the coals, and hot coals were poured onto the lid. This created an oven effect inside, allowing bread to be baked or meat to be stewed for hours. The ability to use this oven was a sign of an experienced housewife. While the women were busy cooking, the men did other work also related to fire. A temporary smithy was an integral part of a large train. Using a portable forge and the heat from the coals, the blacksmith repaired broken axles, straightened bent wheel rims, and sharpened tools. The sound of his hammer striking the red-hot metal was another familiar sound of the evening camp. The campfire was also a workshop. By its light, people repaired equipment. Men repaired harnesses, carved new parts for wagons from wood, and cast bullets. Women mended clothes, knitted, and checked supplies. The light of the flames was the only source of illumination, and all work requiring precision had to be done before complete darkness fell. For the children, the campfire was a place to play and learn. They sat in a circle of light, listening to the stories of their elders, playing simple games, or just watching the adults. The fire was a natural boundary for them. They were strictly forbidden to go beyond the illuminated circle, and this simple safety measure worked flawlessly. After dinner, the campfire turned into a social club. The clatter of hammers and the sizzle of frying pans subsided. People gathered around the fire to talk. It was a time to discuss plans for tomorrow, exchange rumors, and tell stories. Often, someone would take out a violin or banjo, and the music would begin. These moments of community were extremely important for maintaining morale on the difficult journey. We tend to think of fire on the frontier as a source of heat and a means of cooking food. However, its functions were much broader. For the pioneer, trapper, and craftsman, fire was first and foremost a universal tool without which no serious work could be done. It was the heart of the field workshop, allowing materials to be worked that were completely unworkable when cold. The most obvious craft application of fire was blacksmithing. Every large wagon train or settlement had its own blacksmith. With the help of a portable bellows-blown forge and charcoal fire, the craftsman could heat metal until it was red hot. This allowed them to repair absolutely everything, from broken wagon axles to rifle locks and plows. Without fire, any breakage of a metal part would have been fatal. Even ordinary pioneers used fire to work with metal. They constantly had to repair chains, boilers, and tools. A simple fire, reinforced with improvised bellows, allowed them to heat the part for straightening. Fire was used for hardening and tempering steel, for example, when sharpening axes or knives, so that the blade would stay sharp longer. These were basic metalworking skills that many possessed. Fire was also indispensable in working with wood. To bend strong hickory or ash wood for making bows, tool handles, or wagon parts, it was steamed over a fire. The hot steam made the fibers flexible and pliable. After shaping the wood, it was dried, and it remembered its new form. Thus, with the help of fire, strong and reliable structures were created. Burning wood was another common technique. Pioneers burned the ends of fence posts before digging them into the ground. The thin layer of charcoal that formed on the surface served as an antiseptic and protected the wood from rotting in moist soil. This simple and effective method extended the life of wooden structures for years. Fire was used to make tar and resin. In wooded areas, especially where there were many pine trees, pioneers burned resin from wood in special pits. The resulting tar was an invaluable product. It was used to lubricate the axles of wagons to prevent them from squeaking and overheating. It was used to impregnate ropes to make them waterproof and to caulk the seams of boats. In everyday life, fire was used for lighting. Of course, there were candles and oil lamps, but not everyone had them. The simplest and most accessible source of light in a camp or temporary dwelling was a radiant knot, a piece of resinous pine wood. Such knots burned brightly and for a long time, like a torch, illuminating the hut during long evenings and allowing work to continue. In addition, fire was a means of communication. We are not talking about complex signaling systems, but a simple smoke signal could be used to indicate one's location to a stray group or another wagon train. At night, a large bonfire lit on high ground served as a beacon visible for many kilometers and could guide a lost traveler to the camp. All the methods we have discussed work perfectly in dry weather. But on the frontier, the weather was an unpredictable and often cruel enemy. A week of rain, prolonged drizzle, or sudden wet snow could turn the task of building a fire from a routine chore into a desperate struggle for survival. When everything around you is saturated with moisture, flint and steel become almost useless unless you have dry tinder. The first and main victim of dampness was tinder. The very charred fabric that caught a spark so easily was hygroscopic. It absorbed moisture directly from the air. Even the most airtight tinderbox could fail. A pioneer who opened his cherished box and found a damp mass instead of dry, brittle material found himself in a very difficult situation. His whole life now depended on his ability to improvise. The first step was to find shelter. Trying to start a fire in the open rain was pointless. The traveler looked for any shelter, a rock overhang, a dense group of trees with thick crowns, or at least the leeward side of a large boulder. He needed to create at least a small island protected from the wind in direct water. Only there could he begin his work. Then began a desperate search for dry material. An experienced eye knew where to look for it. Dry grass could be found under thick bushes or at the very base of large tree trunks. The most reliable source was bark. On some trees, such as birch or certain types of cedar, the inner layers of bark remained dry even in heavy rain. Thin, paper-like strips of bark made excellent kindling. If there was no dry kindling, it had to be made. To do this, the pioneer looked for dead wood, a dead tree that was still standing. The wood of such a tree was dried by the wind and sun and did not absorb moisture as much as fallen trunks. With an axe, he removed the upper, wet layer to get to the dry core. Then began the painstaking process of making the feathers we talked about. Personal belongings were also used. A piece of fabric torn from the lining of clothing could serve as the last tinder. Sometimes gunpowder from a cartridge was used. A few grains of gunpowder sprinkled on flint produced a bright and hot flash, capable of igniting even slightly damp tinder. It was a risky method, but sometimes the only one available. The process of striking a spark in wet weather was also more difficult. Wet flint and wet tinder produced a weak, unviable spark. Before working, they had to be carefully wiped dry, hidden under clothing, and warmed with body heat. Every spark counted. This required enormous patience and composure. If all these methods failed, the last and most laborious method remained: friction fire. The pioneers adopted this technique from the indigenous people. With a bow and drill or a fire plow, a person could obtain a smoldering ember without a single spark, using only the friction of two pieces of dry wood. Finding suitable dry wood and making the tools was difficult, and the process itself took a lot of effort, but sometimes it was the only chance. As the 19th century drew to a close, the Wild West was changing. The endless prairies were divided by barbed wire, cities grew in place of temporary camps, and railroads replaced wagon trains. The era of the open frontier and the daily struggle for survival by the fire was becoming a thing of the past. But what the campfire taught the pioneers remained with them and formed the basis of a new American civilization. The most important legacy of the common fire was the spirit of mutual aid, or community. In harsh conditions, where the state could not be relied upon, neighbors were the only support. The rule of sharing the fire transformed into more complex social practices. If a settler's house or barn burned down, neighbors from all over the area would gather to build him a new one in a matter of days. This practice, known as barn raising, was a direct descendant of the ethics of the common fire. The bonfire taught people to negotiate and create rules from scratch. On a wagon train, where there were no laws, people created a charter and elected a captain. Around the evening fire, they learned to resolve disputes and make collective decisions. This experience of direct self-government formed the basis of the political culture of the new states. People got used to relying on themselves and their community, rather than waiting for outside help. The culture of fire itself also changed. From a wild campfire, it moved inside the house, becoming a hearth. The fireplace or cast iron stove became the center of the farmhouse, just as the campfire was the center of the camp. In the evenings, the family gathered around it, read books, and talked. Fire was tamed, but its psychological role as the center of the home and a symbol of comfort remained unchanged. The resourcefulness born of the struggle for fuel turned into American ingenuity. People who were used to making tools out of nothing and finding unconventional solutions carried this engineering streak into their new lives. The ability to adapt, find a way out, and fix what is broken with the help of improvised means. All these qualities, honed around the campfire, became part of the national character. The ethic of hospitality born by the fire also remained. On the frontier, a person's home was open to any traveler. Offering food and lodging was a matter of honor. This was a direct legacy of a time when refusing to let a frozen person in to warm themselves by the fire was tantamount to a death sentence. This openness and willingness to help strangers shaped the social climate in the West for a long time. Even the attitude toward resources that was established at that time was dual in nature. On the one hand, the pioneers learned to be incredibly thrifty, using every scrap of wood and every piece of cloth. On the other hand, faced with seemingly endless forests and prairies, they got used to taking everything they needed from nature without thinking about the consequences. This duality, thriftiness in everyday life and wastefulness on a large scale, also became a legacy of that era. The image of the campfire itself remained in the culture as a powerful symbol. It became a symbol of adventure, freedom, male friendship, and unity with nature. The cowboy sitting by the campfire with a cup of coffee became an icon of the American West. This romantic image celebrated not hardship, but the spirit of freedom and independence that came from a fire lit under the open sky. We have come a long way from a single smoldering ember held in a trapper's palm to the complex social rituals around the fires of a wagon train. We have seen how fire was transformed from an element into a tool, from a tool into the center of the community, and finally into a symbol of an entire era. Pioneers did not just share fire to keep warm. They shared life, information, safety, and hope. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our next journeys into the exciting and complex history of the American frontier.